when we were, here off the coast of the US, our jets weren't necessarily taking off armed, right? But when we were in the Middle East, right, on station, we were in the Gulf and these things came back, then you have jets that are taking off that are fully loaded. They are locked and loaded, and you're going to fly these things, this experimental tech around that possibly could be billions of dollars worth of tech, and you're not going to tell the pilots and you're just going to assume that they're not going to shoot at it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's you're starting to get into some very dangerous territory when you're doing that. And that's why there's always deconfliction, right? They're not going to test these things, number one, in a zone where there's a lot of military activity or military operations that are ongoing, like real world operations. You're not going to test something there and not let people know. It just would not happen, because you may end up having your asset become a casualty, and nobody would want that.
Welcome back to All Things Unexplained. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most widely discussed UFO incidents in recent history, the Gimbal encounter, with our guest, Matthew Roberts, who served aboard the USS Roosevelt when this astounding event took place. As we approach a pivotal moment in UAP transparency, the House of Representatives has set a date for a new hearing on November 13th, 2024. At 11:30 a.m. Eastern, the House Oversight Committee will host Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, Exposing the Truth, featuring notable witnesses such as Tim Gallaudet, Rear Admiral and former U.S. Navy officer, Luis Elizondo, former Department of Defense official, Michael Gold of Redwire Corporation and former NASA Associate Administrator, and investigative journalist Michael Schellenberger, whose recent report unveiled a covert UFO program dubbed Immaculate Constellation. In the weeks ahead, we'll explore what this historic hearing means for UFO disclosure, but now it's time to explore what the Gimbal incident reveals about the mysteries in our skies.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
Did the CIA write Wind of Change by the Scorpions?
As humans busied themselves about the various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied.
Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
With infinite complacence, people went about their affairs, yet across an immense ethereal gulf, intellects vast and unsympathetic drew their plans against us.
All of a sudden, a stick out of nowhere landed right in front of us, and there was no tree, nothing overhead. Something threw it at us.
Yeah.
All things unexplained.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
All right, Unexplained ones, welcome back. This is Dr. Mounce, and we are live tonight, and I'm pleased to be joined again by Smitty. Smitty, what's happening?
Well, not much, just ready for a little cool weather down here in Mississippi, but it doesn't seem to be coming our way, but maybe it will soon.
Yeah, I hear that, and we are sad to not have CJ with us tonight. She's a little under the weather, so
Miss
hi,
CJ.
But shout out to her. She really held the fort down, and I guess Smitty did too while I was gone on a little adventure. I can't talk about that just yet, but as we get closer to December, hopefully I can. It's going to be pretty exciting, pretty fun to talk about. And we are so glad that all of you are joining us tonight. We have a really special guest joining us tonight to talk about the Gimbal UFO incident. We're going to introduce him after a short commercial, but while you're here, we really appreciate you. If you hadn't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Smitty, we're over 11,000 subscribers now.
That is awesome. And we started out with 0, so we're
Well,
at 11,000.
Yeah, but I guess
there was
everybody
at
starts out with 0, don't they? Probably.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying, though. We went from 0 to 11,000 in virtually very little time.
Yeah.
So
And I
that's
still
pretty
remember
awesome.
trying to talk CJ's parents into figuring out how to subscribe
Yep.
to
And
the show.
so it's kind of just skyrocketed. So that's really cool. We're very appreciative of all
So
our
the-
subscribers.
Oh, heck yeah. So they weren't even the first two because they couldn't figure out how to subscribe. But that's
Yeah.
okay. You know, if you also want to help the show out, make sure to hit the like button, comment, and share this video. We love hearing from all of you. You can also really help the show out by checking out our YouTube store. The link is somewhere below us. And we got a couple of people joining in already. Palmer Joss says, Sup all. Hey, Palmer, thanks for joining us tonight. And speak of the devil, the unexplained, CJ says, miss you all. Hi, CJ, we miss you. We hope you're feeling better soon. And speaking of CJ, we have a little commercial break featuring CJ. And when we come back, we're going to welcome our special guest, Matthew Roberts.
It'll be good to hear CJ. For sure.
Yes, it will. And here she comes. We're live. And so I'm going to stumble through a little bit. Oh, awesome. Palmer Shaw says, greetings from the vetted community. I have to say, y'all, we love vetted. We love Patrick from vetted. And we are in talks to go join a vetted episode as we get closer to December. So I was actually talking to Patrick the other day and I said, hey, look, I've been a bit of a part of a thing that I can't say much about, but if we wait a little bit closer to Christmas, then that might be a good idea. So Patrick was kind enough to invite All Things Unexplained to visit Vetted, and Vetted has been a guest on All Things Unexplained. So Palmer, thank you so much for jumping over. I don't think Patrick will mind that you're jumping over to All Things Unexplained tonight. We really appreciate you. And here is CJ with a little commercial break if I don't mess it up.
All Things Unexplained is free to watch on YouTube and listen to wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support our show, you can visit our YouTube store. Additionally, you can find us on Venmo under All Things Unexplained. Be sure to check out our website, allthingsunexplained.com. All proceeds from the sales of Dr. Mounce's books on Amazon and Audible also go straight to our show.
All right, and we have Matthew Roberts here with us tonight as our special guest. He's going to talk to us about the GIMBAL UFO incident. Matthew is a former U.S. Naval intelligence specialist who was stationed aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt in 2015 during the now famous UFO encounters that led to the release of the declassified GIMBAL and GoFast videos. Matthew's experience in witnessing these UAPs firsthand deeply impacted him, sparking a personal journey that he shares in his new book, Initiated: UAP, Dreams, Depression, Delusions, Shadow People, Psychosis, Sleep Paralysis, and Pandemics. You can pick that book up, though there's a link in the show description, and I mentioned it in the chat on our YouTube. Matthew's also been featured on Netflix Encounters. We have seen it. It's a terrific show, and Matthew does a terrific job on there, where he delves into these profound events and their lasting effects. And tonight on All Things Unexplained, we're going to dive into all Matthew's experiences, his views on UAPs, and maybe some other things, and how these encounters have reshaped his life. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It's great.
Absolutely. So, Matthew, can you take us back to 2015 on board the USS Roosevelt?
Yeah, I guess I can. So we were doing our workups off the coast of Florida, just before deployment. That's where we kind of get ready for deployment. And the workup cycle is I don't know, it's a month long. We were out there, and so we were at the end of that when these events occurred. I didn't catch wind of it until a buddy of mine who works kind of with the air wing came in to my shop. I was a cryptologist, so I worked in a skiff and he worked in a skiff. and he came into the shop and he said, "Hey, pull this up real quick." I had some kind of indication that something weird was going on, um, just because the ending of this didn't conform to the ending of other, you know, workup cycles I had been on, because we were at the point where the workup cycle was complete. The people who were on board grading us were supposed to be giving us our grade, right? We were just waiting for that, and it wasn't happening, and so that was when my buddy walked in the shop and he said, "Hey, look at this." And so I pulled it up on my computer terminal, and we, kind of gathered around, and all of us just kind of watched the gimbal footage and the GoFast footage for the first time in 2015 on this computer in a skiff.
And Matthew, for our listeners, can you remind us what does SCIF stand for?
It stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. So it's where, kind of highly classified stuff is happening on board. And that was where I worked every day, because my job as a cryptologist was very sensitive. So everything that I did was in a skiff.
Right. And so when you first saw these videos, were you aware, was this real time as fighter pilots were also having encounters with these craft, or were you aware of that the encounters had already happened?
Well, so like I said, we were at the end of the workup cycle, and the night before, I think I was, I was getting ready for bed. I was about to hop in my rack. It was late, kind of after taps. So there weren't supposed to be any announcements going on over the intercom after taps, unless it's kind of an emergency, right? And so I wasn't expecting anything, and I was kind of looking forward to just going to bed and not having sleep interrupted by
Right.
whatever exercise was going to be going on. So the air defense exercise had finished that day, and I was getting in my rack, and I heard, over the intercom, "Launch the alert." And I was like, that's strange, because the 8X is over, right? What's going on? And so I called up to my shop, I think, and I said, "Do I need to come up there? Is something happening?" And they were like, "I don't know, nothing that I know of." So I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna go to bed." But it was the next day that, I saw this footage, um, and it was, I don't know, it was kind of, it was very unsettling. I'll say that. It was kind of immediately unsettling, and almost like sick to your stomach kind of unsettling, right? Because you realize that, I don't know, you kind of realize that, okay, well, this is real, right? But then it starts to sink in that, with that realization, it starts to sink in that, okay, not only is this real, but people have been lied to about it for a very long time, and so you just kind of start to question a lot of different things from that point forward. And I think that's kind of what everyone is going through, or a lot of people are going through right now with the disclosure process. That you have people like Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, all these guys coming forward saying, okay, this is real, disclosure is going to be happening. You've got Congress pushing for it. So I think a lot of people are kind of waking up to that stick to your stomach feeling, because you realize this is real, and then there's all those implications that come along with that, right? Like the fact that everybody's been lied to about it, and what does that mean? And so yeah, that's basically what happened.
Right. And before I bring up the video, and I think this would be a good time to actually watch the Gimbal UFO video, or at least the portion we have you thought to yourself that, wow, how much more disclosure can people need, Matthew? Because here it is. This literally is disclosure. I mean, have you thought that to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I have, but I also understand that everybody has their own kind of idea of what this is. And so I think a lot of people, in terms of like, confirmation bias, are maybe waiting for the information to drop, which confirms what they always believed, right? That it's just space aliens from another planet, or it's like Star Trek, or it's like anything else that's kind of familiar to them, in terms of what people think of when they think alien. They think Sigourney Weaver, that kind of alien, and then there's all these kind of horror movie aliens that they have this idea of what it's going to be and how this is going to turn out. So I think that that's what people are waiting for. They're waiting for that kind of Hollywood explanation of what's going on, and it's just not that simple. It's not that simple. It's much more complex than that.
Yeah,
Which I
because
think
you're. Oh,
I
go
I
ahead.
I I will say also that I think that that was part of it, right? That was part of the cover up. You had uh uh, just after World War II and Roswell and all of that, you had elements within the government that were funding, sci-fi movies, right? And that was to kind of shape the narrative into how the public should perceive this kind of thing, right? It's just aliens from another planet. They're just explorers, or they're experimenting on us, or whatever, you know, whatever they wanted you to think about it. And that's what people, when you say aliens now, they have this automatic go-to in their mind as to what they think it is, whether it be the Sigourney Weaver kind of aliens, or the day the Earth stood still aliens. It runs the gamut.
Like behind you, I was noticing that really cool poster behind you.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. I like it. I love that movie. It's very good.
Yeah, and I think you make great points there, Matthew. And Diana Pasulka has talked a lot about that sort of thing in her book American Cosmic, right? About how the media and Hollywood and television shows, even radio shows back in the day, really shaped our view of what extraterrestrials means, right? And I think part of this is kind of like, have you ever seen the movie They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper? It's one of our
No,
favorites
I have.
here at the show, so you definitely need to check it out. It's made by Carpenter, John Carpenter. It's a classic, and it's a very dystopian future at the time that the movie came out, but it looks a lot like our present day, to be honest. But all of a sudden, Piper finds these shades. He puts them on, and he suddenly can see that some of the people around him are extraterrestrials. Right? He can kind of see underneath their skin and see, hey, there's something else going on here. And the billboards all around him and the television commercials and everything, he suddenly realizes this is all sort of subliminal messaging going on, right? Like giving you little commands like obey and shop and consume and sleep and work. And I think part of what you're talking about is people are just stuck in the daily grind, right? And when they
Mhm.
see something like the gimbal UFO, that came from the most reliable of sources, our own military, it really doesn't, shake them out of their daily routine.
Right. Yeah, because I think that along with disclosure is the fact that nobody's running around screaming with their hair on fire, right? Like you see in movies like Independence Day, where everyone's in a panic, and everybody's trying to get out of town, and it's a big thing. And so I think in that sense, it's not really getting that much attention. I think it's going more mainstream. I mean, we saw Louis Elizondo was on the Daily Show the other night,
Right.
and so that's kind of more mainstream. And you have people like these late night talk hosts that are talking about it, kind of things that they've seen in the news, and they'll bring up aliens. So I mean, it's getting there, but the answer to this stuff is not as simple as any of those Hollywood movies would portray. So um, I don't know
Oh
what
yeah.
how we get to that point where we move past these kind of Hollywood renditions of what this is all about.
Well,
Yeah, you're right.
I think a factor of that is those renditions. Until you've experienced something like you've experienced, or a lot of our guests who experience the same thing, you don't have anything to really compare it to. You can watch another movie like about some romance. Well, if you've been in a romance that's similar to what they experienced on screen, but unless you've
Mhm.
seen an alien, you only literally have what Hollywood portrays to go on. And that's kind of sad that people do that. But if they take that for, you know, the gospel of aliens, and they don't really delve into the science of it or look at other people's experiences. And that's kind of sad, really. And that's one reason we wanted to start the show, not to really come to a conclusion, but to get people to tell their stories. And
Yeah.
that's what we try to endeavor to do.
And this might be a good time just to check out the Gimbal UFO.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
And Matthew, you're welcome to comment on this as we watch it.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
You know,
Holy,
when I watched it in the skiff, I turned the sound all the way down because I couldn't stand the pilots and the way they were talking about it. You know,
That's
because
a good idea. We could try that too.
well, pilots do that. They that's the way they talk to each other, and yeah, and that's the thing, is that it stands right up on its front or its side or whatever that is, you know, and that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, and it seems to have a very unusual shape too.
Yeah,
I've heard some people compare it to the top that you used to play with as a kid, you know, that spins around. And maybe are those tops called gimbals? I guess maybe they
yeah,
are. Yeah. And but yeah, there it goes. And you know, to me, that what makes this unique too is it moves, right? Like it does something that is seems to the naked eye and to the general public to be quite unconventional. And
yeah,
I think that sets it apart. A lot of these videos we do see something moving in a singular direction. It never changes direction or really moves in any sort of anomalous way. But you hear these pilots talking about it. And by the way, you would think that these pilots would be trained enough to recognize prosaic explanations like balloons,
oh yeah,
um,
absolutely.
that sort of thing. And so it's always amazed me when people don't give that the credence that it deserves. We're literally talking about the most skilled observers of objects in the sky that you could possibly hope for, so far as I know.
Yeah, and another thing I kind of find insulting is that, you know, there are debunkers out there who will say this was just some other aircraft. It had its IFF switched off, or you know, wasn't communicating for whatever reason. But you got to remember that this was a several day event, right? This wasn't just one day. This happened once, right? This was several days long. This went on, and so there's that, first of all. Second of all, you know, you have to remember that it, and you have to think about this in the perspective of military people, right? So we're out on this multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier. We have something entering our airspace that is not responding to queries. It's not emitting IFF. It is incumbent upon us at that point to figure out what's going on. Because not only could it be a threat, but it could be, you know, what people automatically will think post 9/11 is this an airliner that's been hijacked, right? And so this situation becomes very serious very quickly. Um, and a lot of these debunkers will just have people think that, oh well, we sent one aircraft up to take a look at it and we couldn't figure it out, so that was it, and we shut off the lights and we went to bed. I mean, that's just ridiculous, you know. We sent multiple aircraft up there to try and figure out what was going on. And this is the kind of footage that they came back with, right? This was not identifiable. These debunkers are just they're ridiculous. I mean, they would have people believe that we're just a bunch of like Barney Fifes, that we've got to keep our bullet in our shirt pocket so that we don't injure ourselves or anyone else. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. And Matthew, CJ jumps in here with a great question. Is there more footage that you're aware of, or was this all that we garnered over several days?
I'll go ahead and say that there is more footage. I have seen more footage than this, but obviously that footage has not been made public.
Right. And Matthew, I would love it if you'd clarify. You talk about IFF. Can you clarify what you're talking about there?
Oh yeah, so all aircraft will emit on a certain frequency. It's like FAA laws and regulations that you emit an identifier saying I am whatever, BA 12345, British Airways flight 12345, right? So you have to always be emitting this, and that's called identify friend or foe. You've got to be emitting this signal identifying yourself, and if you're not, it's usually because you're up to no good, right? Right? You don't want people
for
to know
sure.
who you are. When you see someone in the military, in particular, from a military perspective, you see someone that's or an aircraft that you have a radar contact on, and it's not emitting that, you automatically go to this is something nefarious, right? Because that's the only time you ever see that, is if they're up to no good.
But Matthew,
So
at
that's
that
what
point
IFF
too,
is.
you're talking about not US though, right? Like you're not ever encountering, but
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, United States craft not emitting their IFF.
Right, yeah. And some of the debunkers will say, well, they just it wasn't working on that aircraft, and that's how they explain this. But this wasn't the only craft, right? Over several days. And so to think, oh, well, all of those craft had their IFF, was unusable for whatever reason is just ridiculous. It's absurd.
I'll tell you something that amazes me too is this right to left movement as it's going. It just is not. It does not look natural to any airplane.
No.
You watched it close, but watch when it just turns right there. It doesn't turn like any other plane that I'm aware of. That's in our
Right,
military.
and I've heard some of the debunkers explain that, oh, well, this is just rotation of the FLIR pod, which it's not, because you can see its relation to the cloud cover remains fairly consistent as it rotates.
Yeah.
And so that rotation is the craft actually rotating like that. It's not that the pod is. If the pod were rotating, you would see the cloud cover would come, off to the right side of this, and it would remain kind of consistent with the level of the aircraft. But it doesn't. You can see it's like the cloud cover there is still at the bottom left in the same place where it was, and this craft is standing up on its whatever, back, front, side. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, the cloud cover essentially maintains a 45-degree angle there throughout the whole video, even as the object rotates. Not only that, but the pilots say in the video, oh my gosh, look at it, it's rotating, right? And so how disgrading is that to say that our pilots would believe that they're watching something rotating just because it's their instruments rotating like that? That has never made any sense to me.
Now that one part too, when it turns, do you notice how the color around it changes? Is that unusual on this type of footage, or
how the color around it? What do you mean?
see how it brightens? Is that just part of it? it kind of dimmed a moment, and then when it turns, it brightens again. It's kind of just, and
Oh,
also I
you're
don't.
talking about like that halo around it,
Yeah,
right?
the halo. Yeah,
Yeah.
it look.
I don't know what that is, but it's clearly some kind of maybe artifact of the propulsion. I mean, because this is showing us like heat and temperature variation is what this is showing us. So there's some kind of temperature variation directly around the craft. I would think that that's what that
Plus,
means.
it's missing a contrail too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no contrail. And, I've spoken with friends of the show who are in positions that they would know about things like this. And they say that, this notion that we're encountering something that's US or adversary that's not emitting an IFF is just ludicrous, that it doesn't make any sense. Matthew, wouldn't that be illegal if it was US
Yeah.
tech doing that? And two, wouldn't it basically be an act of war if that was another country doing that?
Yeah. I mean, it would be it would not be good, right? Like if you're an aircraft and you don't have that system working that identifies you, I don't think you are supposed to leave the ground. I mean, because by law you have to be admitting that, right? And the same thing goes with ships on the surface of the water. You also have to admit an identifier, right? Identifying yourself and your location. So I mean, that's for safety of flight and safety of navigation of the seas. That
Oh
is
yeah.
a
And
thing. And so it's not safe if you're out there and nobody knows you're there and you're not emitting anything and you're not sharing your location, because that means you're not showing up on people's screens, right, when they're out there flying, which can be dangerous.
Well, and plus, let's face it, that would be pretty bold right there to turn off your IFF and to aggressively approach the USS Roosevelt and all its systems and fighter pilots, etc. I mean, that would
Right.
be a pretty bold move by any human being.
Yeah,
Let's be
because
honest.
another part of these laws is that you have to monitor. So there's a hailing frequency, right? And so you have to monitor that at all times. And so when one of these craft is inbound towards a strike group or a U.S. battleship, whatever the case may be, the people on board who are tracking all of this will go get on that phone and they'll say, identify yourself, and then they'll recommend they'll tell them, you're going to change course and go around us. You're not going to overfly us. Being a U.S. warship, you wouldn't want to test that, so you're going to alter your course and you're going to go around. But if you have someone who's not even responding to that, you have to launch jets to figure out, well, who is this? What are they doing? And so, I mean, this was the result, is this footage.
Right, Matthew, do you have any idea what the size of this object was?
I don't. I have no idea. No.
What about the altitude?
Well, I think the altitude says on here somewhere, doesn't it?
I think
No.
it
I would
probably
think it should.
does. I'm just not familiar enough with what I'm looking at. I can't remember exactly, but I do believe, still, I just can't see this being a balloon either, because I've heard that theory too, and the Chinese spy balloon has kind of been back in the news lately, and we may reconnect back with that later, Matthew. But I think it's safe to say that you do not believe this to be any sort of spy balloon type of object.
No, not at all. Uh-uh.
Well,
No,
I
I
think
mean
it,
it's going against the wind, which is 120 knots, which I mean, even if a balloon has some kind of propulsion on it, like 120 knot wind is going to be difficult to go against if you're a balloon, because you've got a lot of surface area, right? And you got to push against 120 knots to go as fast, however fast you're going, you know. So that it's just implausible. I don't think that's plausible.
plus I think it goes back to this, We have probably the most well-trained Air Force in the history of the world. If this is a balloon, I'm pretty sure we could have picked that out. They wouldn't have been so stunned by something that would have been that recognizable. These guys live to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to. If they don't recognize something, it could be their end. Possibly.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you know if we fired upon these vessels, whatever they may be?
If our strike
Yeah,
group
if
did,
we,
no,
yeah, we
they
didn't.
didn't. I know that they did not.
Well, and I tell you another theory I've heard, Matthew, and that is this notion that, okay, this is U.S. tech, and we are simply testing it against our own selves. What do you make of that?
I think that is garbage. So I have been a part of tests like this where, okay, we're gonna bring something into your airspace, and it's a test. And whenever they do these kinds of things, everyone is aware, right? Everyone that needs to know about this is aware. And they'll get on the speaker, the intercom on the ship, and they'll say, "Hey, we're testing some things. You're going to see some things in the sky. Just know that it's normal. Don't worry about it. We know what's going on. It's just a test, right?" And so people are aware when these things are going on. They're not. It's not a surprise to anyone. Because so here's the thing. So when we were, here off the coast of the U.S., our jets weren't necessarily taking off armed, right? But when we were in the Middle East, right, on station, we were in the Gulf, and these things came back, right? Then you have jets that are taking off that are fully loaded. They are locked and loaded, and you're going to fly these things, this experimental tech around that possibly could be billions of dollars worth of tech, and you're not going to tell the pilots and you're just going to assume that they're not going to shoot at it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's you're starting to get into some very dangerous territory when you're doing that. And that's why there's always deconfliction, right? They're not going to test these things, number one, in a zone where there's a lot of military activity or military operations that are ongoing, like real world operations. You're not going to test something there and not let people know. It just would not happen, because you may end up having your asset become a casualty, right? And nobody would want that.
Right. I mean, it never made sense to me that we would be testing something against our own selves. It would be unethical. It would be dangerous
Yeah.
and simply unprecedented. And certainly the pilots scrambled after these objects. They would be in the know, right? If anybody is in the know, the pilots that are actually engaging these objects would be in the know. Now, you brought up another video known as the GoFast video. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Ryan Graves had an encounter with the GoFast. And this was also from the Roosevelt. So you said that you also were on the Roosevelt during the GoFast encounters as well? Oh, let me mute.
Yeah, and so this was during the same several day event, right? All of this video came out at the same several day event. So this is just one of the clips, right? And it shows an object, and the pilot gets a lock on it. So it's not some kind of atmospheric phenomenon or anything like that, because you can't get a lock on atmospherics. You can't.
I think it's pretty clear to see we do have an actual object here. Okay.
hmm
Now, one of the theories I've heard from debunkers about this video is that what we're seeing is simply the acceleration of the craft or the instrument itself that's recording the craft. And that's what makes this object appear to be going as fast as it is. What do you say about that, Matthew?
Well, I would say you can see right here in the first few seconds of this video where the cloud cover underneath is fairly static, and you can see that this thing is traveling along that cloud cover just in the first few seconds of the video before he gets a lock on it. So that's bunk too. It's traveling fairly quickly. I think there's no doubt about that. But debunkers have said it's parallax, which they would have you believe that this thing is maybe perhaps stationary. But you can see right here in these first few seconds of the footage that it is not stationary. It's actually traveling along before he gets a lock on it.
That would be really freaky too, to see something like that shooting across the water. Smitty, were you about to say
I was
something
just
earlier?
going to ask, what was the reaction of the people around you to seeing this footage?
They really didn't have much of a reaction to it at all. There wasn't much of a reaction. I mean, my reaction was much different from other people. I at the time I didn't really understand why, but a lot of people saw it and they thought it was interesting, whatever, and they went on with their daily duties. They weren't too impressed with it, but I, for me, I stopped and I was like, I kind of obsessively watched all of this footage, trying to figure out what was going on here. And I thought it was just incredible, you know. But other people didn't have that reaction. They just went on about their business and they put it in the back of their minds and forgot about it.
Well, how has this footage affected you after, even years later? How's it changed you?
Well, obviously I had some kind of emotional reaction to it, almost as though I knew something about this, but I knew that I didn't. So it was a little disturbing to me that I was having such an emotional reaction to it at the time. Like I remember I wasn't I just couldn't eat. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to eat. I had no appetite. It was just I don't know. It's difficult to explain the feeling that you have. And so you're just kind of down in the dumps about it. Like, oh God, this is real. And now what does that mean? You know? But I never thought that this footage would ever see the light of day. I thought I would never. Once I left that ship, I thought I'm never going to see that again, right? And then there it was in the New York Times, which is not something that's supposed to happen. So when that happened, it kind of brought all of that back, bubbling back up to the surface. Like, oh, now I got to deal with this again, right? Because here it is in the New York Times.
Well, you bring up a good point about that. With it being at the Times and the government hearings, all this being released, what do you think is a catalyst behind those actions? Because if this would have been 30 years ago, we'd have just pulled up the rug and swept it all under and put it back down.
Right. Well, I think one of the catalysts for this is the fact that you can't. This is going to be. It's becoming more difficult to keep this a secret, right? Because everyone's got a camera. Everybody's got a camera on their phone. People are going to see strange things. They're going to start photographing them. It wasn't like back in the 50s where you just weren't walking around with a camera all the time.
Yep,
right?
that's true.
And the same is true for pilots, right? Because pilots will sometimes have their cell phone on them, and so they're gonna be able to take, even if they don't have pods on their aircraft to be able to take any kind of footage, like they can hold up their cell phone and get some pictures or some video footage. So I think it's just that one of the catalysts is that it's just impossible to keep a secret at this point. And not only is it impossible to keep it a secret, but even within, let's say, behind closed doors, it's much more difficult to keep this a secret, because I can tell you that just when I started talking about this stuff at work, I would have people come up to me who just in the course of doing their job, they would be like, "Hey, I came across this. What is this? What do you think of this?" And they would show me some picture or footage or something. And I would be like, "Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think that that's probably real." And we've heard a lot about how there's been this group started behind closed doors, on one of the classified internets, where people just get together and they will post things that they find or see just in the course of doing their normal job, right?
Right.
And so that kind of thing is happening more and more. So you can't really keep this as some kind of special access program, because it's everywhere, right? You can't control who's going to see this anymore. And so it's becoming this big open secret behind closed doors in a way than before. So I think that has a lot to do with the push for disclosure as well. But obviously there are a lot of people doing a lot of hard work. Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, they're in there with the Senate and Congress, and they're talking to people and they're pushing, and thank God for them. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, they're moving the ball, and I think we all owe them a debt of gratitude for that.
I agree. I agree. We're glad to have you with us tonight, Matthew. Can you tell us a little bit more about your book? It's
Yeah, so it basically just documents what happened to me after 2015, and when what started happening to me when I arrived at the Office of Naval Intelligence. I was transferred there as an analyst, um, and I spent 3 years there. And this just documents what happened to me while I was working there, and
yeah,
it documents like non-human intelligence contact type events, experiencer type stuff. And so that's basically what it's about. And then the conclusions that I came to as a result of that. It was very scary. It was a very scary, harrowing experience. But I'm grateful for it, obviously. And I wrote, I thought enough of it that I wrote a book about it. And I will say too that, experiencers, just hang in there, because this stuff is going to come out too. I was not the only one at ONI who was having experiences, right? This wasn't just me.
well, tell us, where can people get initiated? UAP dreams, depression, delusions, shadow people, psychosis, sleep paralysis, pandemics.
You can get it on Amazon. I had to self-publish on Amazon because I
Yeah.
wasn't some kind of big name like Lou Elizondo or anybody else. So, and no one wanted to pick up my book, so I just self-published on Amazon.
Okay, that's great. We're glad to have you with us. And listeners, if you can, pick up a copy of his book, Amazon.com.
Well, we've got a direct link in the show description that listeners can click on right now. If you go to the show description, it'll take you right there. You can order it in just seconds. And one of your topics I noticed, Matthew, is sleep paralysis. And
Yeah.
this is a very controversial topic
Mhm.
in the realm of UFOs and abductions and that sort of thing.
Right.
What can you tell us about your experience and your take on sleep paralysis?
Well, sleep paralysis is something that people have been talking about for thousands of years, and I think only in recent history, we've dismissed it as nonsense. But certainly in antiquity, up until, I don't know, maybe the 50s, 60s, 70s, people thought of it as something that was very paranormal and involved the paranormal, right? That this was an actual occurrence. But science today will just dismiss it as, oh, it's nothing to see here. Don't pay attention to it. It's just and of course I kind of, in my book, I talk about how that's just nonsense, right? I think everyone else throughout the course of human history knows better, right, than a few scientists do today. I certainly don't buy the modern explanation of sleep paralysis at all. And that's simply because, you can have experiences where you're told something within a sleep paralysis that you don't know about. You could be told something, anything, right? And you can then get up and Google that thing, and you find out it's a real. Oh, that's a real thing, you know. And so you can't at that point you can't just dismiss this as nothing, right? There's something there. And so I think it's really unfortunate that science just dismisses it in the way that it does.
Yeah, one thing that shocked us on this show is we've had a lot of scientists on with us, physicists, astrophysicists, and it always amazes us how a lot of the times after the show, they'll reveal to us some very paranormal encounters and experiences that they have had, and they've kind of made it clear that they believe that there's some sort of association. Do you see some sort of association between things like what people generally consider paranormal and the UFO phenomenon? And but not only that, but with science, physics, astrophysics, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And and one of the really unfortunate things about all of this being kept a secret is that this kind of stuff just kind of gets left to people who have never experienced it to try and explain it, right? And so
Right.
within science, I think that that's a very dangerous thing to do. And it's unfortunate for science, but I think the only way you can actually study this stuff is if you have experienced it. Because if you haven't experienced it, you don't even know what you're looking at, right? So it's kind of like having a blind person conduct a study of color, right? Like, how are they going to do that? Because you can't see it. And so I just and the ones that do study it, you do talk to them, and then they start to say, "Oh, well, I've actually experienced some things," and so that's why they're looking into it, which is no surprise, right? I'm not surprised by that at all. I just think we need more of them.
Oh, for sure. And we're pleased to be speaking with Matthew Roberts tonight. He has written a book called Initiated, and you can pick it up in the show description right now. And Matthew, I think you're so right about the scientists, but I can tell you that I do think that there are scientists out there, studying the phenomenon that have had these paranormal experiences as well. But it's sad that there's a stigma not only for the general population with this topic, but also for the military. I think that you would agree with that there's some sort of stigma associated when you have an experience, but also with scientists too. There's a stigma, right, attached, like to where they're afraid to admit to having experiences because
Right.
it puts their livelihood at risk, and I feel like that you can probably relate to that.
Yeah, I can't necessarily relate, but I understand, right? Because so my perspective is that when all this stuff was happening to me, I was working at O&I, and obviously there was nobody there that thought that I was crazy, right? Because this stuff is known, and I can tell you that I don't know if I should say this, but I'm gonna say it anyway because I don't see a reason not to. So I got put in touch with people who were studying this stuff for the government, and I would talk to them about the things that were happening to me, and one of the things was this voice that I would hear, right? I would hear this voice when I was waking or in that state between asleep and awake, and it would tell me things, right? This voice would tell me something maybe that was going to happen, or it would tell me the name of an author to read or something like that. And so I would do that, and I would look into these things. And I was telling one of the people at another agency that I was put in touch with about this, who'd been studying it for a long time. And he said, I want you to understand that just because we can't explain it scientifically doesn't mean that isn't real. And he's like, I want to make sure you understand that. And I said, yeah, absolutely, I understand that. I mean, who are you talking to here? When this voice is telling me the names of authors that I've never heard of, right? And I can then look that up and Google it and see it's a real thing. It suddenly, like, I don't need anyone to affirm that for me and tell me, oh, that's really a real thing. I knew that before, but so I mean, all of this stuff that people talk about as paranormal, it's real, right? And we need to figure it out. And science needs to get on it. Just dig in, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Matthew, I really love you brought that up. We have heard of very similar experiences from many people, right? Sometimes on the record, many times off the record. Do you think that your encounter with the Roosevelt, do you think that unlocked your experiences or your susceptibility to experiences? Or do you think has it been there all along and maybe you've had some experiences in the past or maybe you just didn't pay attention to them? Or what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think I talk about that a little bit in the book. I talk about how I had experiences, but I had dismissed them as, oh, this is just a crazy dream, a super hyper realistic dream, nothing to think about, nothing to see there. But then when this happened to me on the Roosevelt and I started to have other experiences in 2017 when I was working at O&I, that's when I kind of put it together and I was like, wait a minute. This is something. And this I've had similar things happen throughout my life where I've just kind of dismissed it and I should not have. One thing in particular, I'll tell this story real quick. I had moved into a condo. I was on the It was like a two-story condo. I was on the top floor. There was a guy on the bottom. I went to sleep one night, had this crazy dream being chased through my condo by entities or whatever. And I get up in the morning. I thought, wow, that's kind of crazy. I felt kind of disgusting. And so anyway, I go downstairs to my Jeep because I'm gonna go get some breakfast that morning, and the downstairs neighbor comes running out of his condo, right? And he's screaming at me. And he said, he's like, your kids were up all night, running around. I was like, whoa, dude. I said, I don't have any kids, right? He's
Wow.
like, at one point it sounded like they threw a goddamn bowling ball down the stairs. And I was like, I don't have any kids. I was the only one in there last night. I don't know what you're talking about, dude. I thought he was crazy. And that was one of the kind of immediate flashbacks that I had because there was someone else confirming that there was something going on in the condo, right? This guy heard it, and I just dismissed it. I thought he was a nut job and that I had just had a nightmare, right? And it wasn't that simple, clearly.
And now you know how CJ, who's not with us tonight, and mine's neighbors feel because we really have kids making those noises. So might might be a little bit of paranormal activity mixed in there too, but there's just a lot of freaking wild kids running around these parts. So that's an amazing story. Matthew, we really appreciate your time being with us tonight. Are you up for a few hot takes and some listener questions before we close out?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Then let's get to some hot takes with Matthew Roberts, author of Initiated. You can pick that up in the show description. And let's see. Oh, I really want to talk about this. We're not going to cover all the hot takes, but I really want to talk about this. 2004. This is probably the other most famous military video. This is from Fravor, I believe, took this video, the Tic Tac encounter from the USS Nimitz, and I can actually pull this up on the screen as well. And it actually starts off looking very similar to the gimbal, in my opinion,
Hmm.
if people haven't seen this before. But this is from 2004 from the Nimitz, and I believe this was off Catalina Island, perhaps.
Yeah, it was West Coast. Yeah, and I mean, again, like this is not. I mean, these things happen all the time, right? It's not that the Nimitz and the Roosevelt were the only carrier groups to ever encounter anything. They pretty much all do. But it's just that they're known, because there's these footage, this footage that has come out about them. So,
And of course, it's the very end here of this video that's the most intriguing because the pilot is locked on to what they described as a tic tac, and then boom,
mhm.
it's
Yeah,
gone.
it just takes off.
And that's pretty scary to me. And we've had people like Kevin Knuth, who's part of an organization called UAPX, that with other physicists have studied this tic tac encounter and other encounters, right? And they say the physics that would be required for these things to do these maneuvers is just mind blowing and clearly not capable of human means.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. I hope we end up seeing more kind of footage and maybe better footage as Congress hopefully declassifies this stuff. Hopefully they'll pass this UAP Disclosure Act. I mean, I think I don't know if you guys ever put this out, but everybody needs to call their congressmen and their senators and tell them that they want this stuff passed. And don't take it for granted that other people are calling. You just call yourself and let them know, right? Make your opinion known. The more people contact them, the better.
That's great advice, and we appreciate friend of the show, UFO Intros. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. And UFO Intro says Matthew has a really powerful testimony. So glad you got him on. Well, we are honored to be joined by Matthew Roberts tonight. He has written a book called Initiated. You can pick that up in the show description. UFO Intros and all the others watching tonight on YouTube or X. Thank you for joining All Things Unexplained tonight. Matthew, another hot take I've got here for you. And I kind of delved into this, I kind of dipped my toe into it when I started talking about sleep paralysis. But what's your hot take on abductions?
So my hot take on abductions is that they're not abductions, right? It's the beginning of a process. Um, and it's a process that is transformational within you, the individual, and that's what it's all about. And people might think that sounds corny, but we see evidence for this in nature. You've got caterpillars that transform into either a moth or a butterfly, and the same is kind of true for humans psychologically, and that's kind of what's happening there, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but that's my take on it. And I will say that my favorite books on this topic are not UFO books, right? My favorite UFO books don't mention UFOs at all. I like the works of people like Joseph Campbell, people like Jungian psychology, Dr. Jung. I love
Yes.
reading those types of books. He did write a book about UFOs, but for the most part, he doesn't really touch the subject. But of course, everything that these people write is about this stuff, right? Human mythology is all about this. I like to read things like Plato, philosophers. Arthur Schopenhauer is one of my favorites, and they never mention UFOs, but I know that they are people who have experienced anomalous things, and that's what made them into what they were, right? These philosophers or great artists, or Leonardo da Vinci. I see it in his work.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
that's kind of my hot take.
And I really like that. I've never quite heard it put that way before. And you're totally right. There seem to be clues, and not so subtle clues, by the way, kind of placed throughout human history. And
Yeah,
that's just the human history we know about and have been able to discover, right?
yeah. I
So,
mean, and you look back at all the lore and the mythology, and you clearly see that people are talking about gods coming from the sky. It's so this stuff has been going on for a long time. But that's the problem is that those things don't occur to us. It doesn't occur to us to look back at those types of things because we've been fed this kind of narrative from Hollywood about what this stuff is all about, right? We shouldn't associate it with anything other than nefarious aliens coming from the sky or abduction. We talk about, but I just don't see it that way, right? And one of my favorite things in terms of abduction, if you want to study Greek mythology along these lines, there's an abduction myth, right? And I start my book out with it. It's the Homeric hymn to the goddess Demeter, and it talks about how Demeter's daughter Persephone was abducted by Hades, right? And so if you want to understand the abduction phenomenon, read that myth, right? Don't watch some Hollywood movie about it, because and the reason I say that is because this myth has survived for thousands of years,
Right.
right? And there's a reason for that, because it speaks some truth, right? And so that's when I'm looking at sources and things to look at, looking for answers in all of this. I like to read things that are very ancient and old, that have had legs for thousands of years, because there's a reason it's had legs, right? Because
Right.
it's the truth has legs, and it's going to continue walking. So read that myth if you want to learn about abduction.
I tell you something else I like about ancient or ancient myths and those sorts of things is that it's kind of easy for some people to write off modern day encounters, but it's much more difficult. This, I think, part of why a lot of debunkers don't bring up ancient accounts. It's way more difficult to say take a Old Testament account of a flying scroll 30 feet long, 15 feet wide, destroying a village, and apply some prosaic explanation to it, right? Because there weren't a whole lot of
Right.
things flying around 500, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, right? So I think that's why a lot of debunkers don't bring up these ancient accounts, because they kind of just say it like it is, right? And there's not too many ways to make out like it's anything else but than what you're reading.
Yeah. Right. Because I mean, it's impossible to say it was Russia or China,
Yeah.
Yeah.
back then.
Or was it Jamestown? They had a few sightings
hmm
in the 1600s. So, there's, like Mount said, there wasn't anything but birds floating around up there then. So,
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and you
And
can go through, like old newspaper clippings and newspaper articles and find accounts dating back, hundreds of years, where they're talking about, there's maybe some local article in a publication that's talking about, oh, well, the sailors on so and so ship saw, a meteor display where meteors were entering and exiting the water. And it's like, well,
yeah.
meteors don't enter and exit the water, right? They only go in one direction. And so if it's exiting, then what is that, right? You can't say that that's Russia or China if we're talking about 1800. So I mean, all you have to do is do your homework, and it's all there. I mean, just look, and you'll
Oh,
find
yeah.
it.
And that's why I say, wow, disclosure, it seems to really been kind of slapping us in the face for quite a while now. And we just, like you said, we just have to pay attention.
Yeah.
So I have just a couple more if you're up for it, hot takes for you, and then a few listener questions, Matthew. And I'm really excited to get your take on this, because this has kind of been back in the news here again lately, because this is another military encounter. And I said we're going to circle back on this, and earlier I brought up the Chinese spy balloon, right? So shortly after we had this spy balloon situation, which we kind of got shot down off the coast of Myrtle Beach, not far from CJ and myself, we were told that NORAD adjusted their sensors, and that all of a sudden, hey, they're picking up objects now over Super Bowl weekend. This was February 2023. And we shot down one over Dead Horse, Alaska, shot down one over the Yukon Territory, and one more somewhere else, right? And since then, we've seen no photos, no videos, nothing else. They said the object over Dead Horse, they just left it there. That's what they said. Nothing to see, weather too bad, conditions too inhospitable, can't find it. We're just leaving it out there. What can you tell us? What are your thoughts? We scrambled fighter jets or Canada or NORAD and literally shot down 3 UFOs over Super Bowl weekend. And by the way, I'm still amazed more people don't talk about it. But what's your take on it?
I don't really know, but the government saying that they didn't recover anything or they couldn't find it, I don't know that I buy that, right? Because I think if you shoot something down, you're going to make it a very high priority to try and figure out, well, what was shot down, and we need to retrieve that, and that's not going to become, I mean, that's going to be as serious as a heart attack, right? And so I don't know. I'm kind of with you on that. They were very dismissive of it publicly. Um, I'm sure that behind the scenes, that was not the case, and I wouldn't be surprised if they retrieved it. And they're just not sharing that information. I would be amazed if they did not retrieve it actually, because that just doesn't seem. I don't know. Having been in the military, and knowing how people are, and knowing how we got to, dot our I's and cross our T's. I just don't buy that. Oh well, we just couldn't find it. Whatever, you know. I
Right.
just I don't see that. So that's my take on it. But I obviously I don't know anything about it because I wasn't in the military anymore. I wasn't working in intelligence, so I don't know. But I think it's very suspicious that they ended up not being able to find anything. I don't buy it.
No, I don't either. And I think that's kind of demeaning to our forces too, because again, we're talking about the most elite military units in the history of the world. And to just say, well, they couldn't find it, the weather was too bad, call it a day. That's a little bit laughable to me, and I'm not buying it. So
Right.
our
And something else I'll say is that we have accidents, from time to
right.
time. Our jets go down.
Yep.
And
One went
even
down over
over
North Carolina here or South
yeah,
Carolina
over
just
the ocean,
recently. Yep.
and we will always retrieve those things, right? We don't just leave it there. I mean, there may have been a point, I mean, because there's all kinds of things, World War II training, they find all these old planes down there, but that is not the case anymore. We don't leave these things down on the ocean floor. We will retrieve it. That's another thing to consider when hearing them talk about it and be dismissive of, oh, we just could find it. We don't know. It's just it's not right. Something's not right there. You
Yeah,
know.
it's hard to believe. I mean, we can retrieve things on the moon. We can retrieve the submersible that imploded on the way down to look at the Titanic, right? But to say we can't retrieve something over Dead Horse, Alaska, that's a little bit laughable. But
Yeah.
speaking of retrieving craft, my last hot take for you, and then we'll move on to some listener questions, Matthew. Perhaps the keystone event in ufology. What's your hot take on Roswell, the Roswell incident, 1947?
Uh, you know, I don't know anything from behind closed doors about this, so don't quote me on it, but my personal feeling is that it was probably real. I really do think that something crashed there, that it was non-human intelligence related, and that's it. It was what people thought it was. Of course, we've been lying about it ever since. The government's been lying about it ever since. That's my take on Roswell.
Yep, I'm with you, and I want to point out that my friend that does the UFO tour in Roswell, Paul, shout out to him, and make sure to check out his UFO tour. But he made a great observation, Matthew, and then that is if you look at the weather balloon wreckage that they presented in the now infamous photo, it's completely pristine. It's shiny. It's flawless. Looks like it just came out brand new of the weather balloon box. Okay. I've been out there in the New Mexico desert And like my friend Paul pointed out, hey, you don't have to be out here but a few seconds and you're not new looking anymore. Okay. You're not shiny. You're not flawless. You're beat to heck and back by the wind, the conditions, it's really rough terrain out there. It's horrible conditions. And the fact that they presented this pristine looking weather balloon wreckage debris, that's also kind of laughable. And I think shout out to Paul there that pointed that out. That never made a lot of sense there.
Right, and I'll say too that I think it kind of strains credulity to say that someone came upon the wreckage of what they described as like a saucer with bodies, and that they somehow were mistaken, and it was mylar balloon material. Come on.
Pretty big difference between those two things.
Yeah, and I think I even saw their explanation was that there were dummies, like crash test dummies attached to it. Again, like any normal person is not going to look at some crash test dummy laying on the ground and say, "Oh my God, it's an alien." You know what I mean? like people know what crash test dummies look like, or a dummy or a mannequin of some kind. It's not going to fool anybody. So it's just the explanations are ridiculous, but they're simple enough that most people will just accept it and move on. They'll say, "Oh, well, good enough for me. We're done here," you know. But they're so simple in fact that when you really start to think about it and scrutinize it, it's like, well, I don't think so. you know.
Yeah. And the annoying thing is they've been getting away with it for so long, they continue to do the same things and get away with it. And the Super Bowl UFOs are another example. They intentionally put it out there that, oh, you know what? This was probably a child's Pico balloon that we shot down over Dead Horse, Alaska, that we scrambled fighter jets after, by the way. And also, by the way, we had a Pico balloon expert, the man who literally designed the Pico balloon they were talking about. And it was completely ridiculous that they ever said that. Anybody could literally get on the internet and track the Pico balloons for themselves as they went around the globe, okay? And to think that NORAD had to adjust their sensors and confused a child's Pico balloon with some sort of imminent threat that we had to scramble fighter jets after. It was just ridiculous. So, it's kind of annoying that in 1947, they go from flying saucer to weather balloon. And then in 2023, they're still saying they're going from UFOs to weather balloons and Pico balloons. It's kind of annoying. So,
Yeah, right.
we really appreciate your hot takes and all those things. And Smitty's got a few listener questions for you if you're up for that, Matthew.
Sure.
Also, to say this, the cost of shooting down something
Mhm.
has to be pretty close to astronomical.
Yeah.
And to use it on a balloon makes absolutely no sense
Right.
whatsoever. I remember, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I thought Patriot missiles when we went to Desert Storm were like $250,000 a piece. And of
Yeah,
course,
they're
that's
not.
been
It's not cheap.
1990.
Mhm.
So, to use something that costs that much money to shoot down something that's a balloon doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
Lily G from San Francisco, California. We're glad you wrote into us. Says, what advice would you give to someone who has experienced something similar to your encounter but is afraid to come forward?
Well, I mean, if you're in the military, I would certainly encourage you to come forward because they can probably hook you up with some resources there. But insofar as people coming forward, civilians, I don't know. I guess you just got to be strong, right? Because you're on the right side of history on this. Galileo was somebody who was in the right. He said, "Come take a look through my telescope, and you'll see, what I'm telling you, that the Earth is not the center of the universe." And everyone hated him for it, and people wouldn't come look through his telescope. And but history remembers him differently, obviously. And the same is true today, right? Scientists They're just as dogmatic as any religious leader was back in Galileo's day. So, uh, just be strong, just be vigilant, hold your ground, do your research, look into the human history of this stuff so that you can talk about it and articulate things in a way that people can really understand and kind of feel sympathy towards. And I think that that's the right way to go about it. Just make sure you're doing your research so that you can articulate what has happened to you rather than just say, "Oh, I was abducted by aliens," right? Do your research. Be intelligent about it. That's my advice.
That's great answer. And we found on this show that many people don't come forward due to, fear of backlash. As a matter of fact, we were talking to you before the show started about one of our first guests, Mr. Billy.
Yeah.
There were 20, what was it? It was 24 law enforcement officials, and almost all of those backed out of saying what they saw that night. And there was 24 law enforcement officials there. And
Right.
there was just a handful of people who said, yeah, that's really what happened when they encountered this UAP. So
That's right.
it's a difficult thing for people to handle.
And to be
Right.
honest, it ruined their lives. Like
Mhm.
it ruined all their lives. And Mr. Billy himself would not, even to this day, and he's elderly now, would still not use his real name.
Right. Well, I mean, so today is a little bit different, right? So we have President Barack Obama, General Masters, talking about how there's things in the sky that we can't explain, right? And you've got Congress talking about non-human intelligence in bills, right? Bills that are actively going through Congress and hearings that have happened. And people want to giggle about that stuff, but this stuff is happening, right? People are talking about this. So I would almost say anyone who, would have ill will towards you or kind of dismiss you for it or try to attack you for it, I would just say, well, that's just ridiculous. Everybody's talking about this now. Just shut up, like it's real. Get over it.
Absolutely.
Tom M from Dallas, Texas said, with your background in intelligence, how do you view the role of AARO? Is it a step in the right direction?
I think that's a difficult thing to answer because I don't know, right? And I think it can be a step in the right direction. Has it been thus far? I don't think so, right? I mean, when they were first bringing Arrow in, and they had those hearings where you had, those two national security individuals that were talking about balloons and things like that. It's just, I don't know. That was just more cover up is what they were trying to do, and I don't think that we should let people get away with that anymore. There's plenty of tantalizing footage and pictures out there, not out there, but behind closed doors that they could present to Congress. That's a lot more compelling than some balloons, right? And so I think that that's kind of the issue is that Arrow has kind of been presenting maybe factual cases that they've debunked to Congress, right? And Congress isn't really interested in that. They say, bring us what you haven't debunked. We want to see that stuff, right? And that's what they're not doing. And I don't know why they think that we just need to rip this Band-Aid off and move past this. And Arrow could be a step in that right direction, but I think thus far they have not been. That's my take on Arrow.
I agree. And, they do seem to be cherry picking particular cases to support some type of narrative that they're wanting to portray. And one of our favorite quotes on this show came from one of those first UAP hearings in front of Congress. And here it is right here. And you may have been talking about this person.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
That's where all the good stuff goes. Closed session.
Right. Yeah. And I think after that testimony, I tweeted that I was amazed that they were both of them able to sit upright without a spine,
Oh, yeah.
because it was absolutely ridiculous.
Yep. It was hard to
So
watch.
ridiculous. I've never seen. I don't know if I should.
No,
But
tell us.
I've been in the military. I was in the military for 16 years, and I saw a lot of brave people do a lot of really brave shit, right? And to see those two sit there in front of Congress and just kind of try to wash this away and just be these squirmy little fucking totally spineless assholes was just such a, I don't know. It really rubbed me the wrong way that someone could become so high up in this apparatus and structure and have literally no backbone.
It's insulting, right?
It is. It's insulting. It's I I didn't even have words for it, right? I was so infuriated. It was just absolutely infuriating. I was so angry. But yet there it was, right? People high up, no backbone, no spine, no bravery, you know. They'll just drift in the shifting winds, and it's very unfortunate to witness something like that so publicly. I'll say that. That's what I'll say about those hearings.
Have you heard this rumor lately, Matthew, that apparently at the top of the UFO food chain or cabal, if you will, sits none other than Dick Cheney? Have you heard about this?
I have heard about that, and the thing is, I'm not surprised. I think he was in charge of the CIA at one point, was he not? I mean,
I believe so.
so I'm not surprised by it. That does not surprise me. Because you see that these people who were in charge of like the CIA or NSA or any of these agencies probably will tend to know about these things. It's not surprising.
We have one more listener question for you. Let me find it here. I think this is a great question.
Adam S. from Las Vegas, Nevada says, "You think that UAPs have been monitoring military activity specifically? And if so, why would they be interested in such operations?" That is a great question.
It is a good question, and I don't know that there's a good answer, right? Because there could be any number of reasons why they would be monitoring the military and military operations. They could be, scouting us out to see what our capabilities are, which I doubt, because I think that they would know that. They've been here for a very long time. They've seen us growing up, right? We're not hiding anything from them. I mean, there are some other reasons that I could think of why they would be doing that. And one of the reasons is, and this is kind of something that I've never heard anyone say, is that they want to be seen, right? Not only do they want to be seen, but they want to be seen specifically by higher ranking individuals, not only in our own government, but other governments, right? That would be a good reason to show up in places like this, because what are other governments doing, right? Other governments are spying on us. They might have satellites up there taking pictures of our operations, and so if you're taking pictures of that, oh, and lo and behold, there's these saucers flying around. So you're going to see that as well, right? Not only in our country, but high level people in other countries as well. I mean, that could be a reason why they're showing up. I mean, there's any myriad of answers to that question, and I don't think that we have an adequate answer as yet as to why. It's a good question, and I think we need to answer it.
That just blew my mind. That was a great answer. I've never thought about that possibility.
Right.
But you make a great point. You make a
Yeah.
really great point.
Yeah, and also nuclear facilities, right? Like
Yes.
those things are also going to be monitored by other governments. So if you're showing up over that, high level people not only in our government but other governments are going to witness that. you know, because they're all watching. And so it could be that they're showing up over these things to give us the idea that maybe the frequency of them showing up is increasing, right? Like maybe they're pushing for something, right? Maybe they're pushing for disclosure. And so they're ensuring that they show up more and more often for these leaders to say, it's almost like saying, well, you better start disclosing something before we do, because it's going to be a bad day if we do it first, right? And so I think maybe there's some of that going on. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question with lots of very interesting answers.
It makes sense. Kind of like getting a swimming pool. You put your foot in first and then
Yeah.
your leg, and just kind of test the waters a little bit before you get completely in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've given us certainly a lot to ponder tonight, Matthew, as we look to close out another episode of All Things Unexplained. And we want to give a huge thanks to Matthew Roberts for coming on with us tonight and sharing his experiences on the USS Roosevelt and his experiences after the USS Roosevelt. Please be sure to check out his book, to buy his book, Initiated. The link is in the show description. Go down there and click on it. It'll take you straight to the purchase page. A very minuscule percentage of that will go to All Things Unexplained to help the show out if you purchase his book via the link tonight. And we really appreciate you. Also, check out Matthew on Encounters on Netflix. If you haven't watched it yet, you don't know what you're missing. It's a tremendous documentary produced by Steven Spielberg, and Matthew does a tremendous job on Encounters on Netflix. So make sure to check Matthew out on there as well. Please stay tuned to All Things Unexplained. You know, we've got some really exciting things coming up soon, including the Paranormal Ranger, the author of the Paranormal Ranger, who is the Paranormal Ranger himself, Stanley Milford Jr., will be coming on with us. And we're very excited to announce tonight that very soon, we don't have the date quite yet, but going one-on-one with Patricia Cornwell about her new book, Identity Unknown, which, folks, there's a lot of ufology in this book. Our own CJ Derringer will sit down with Patricia Cornwell on All Things Unexplained and go one-on-one about Identity Unknown. You can also pre-order that on Amazon as well. And so we're very excited for that. Matthew, do you have any last words for us tonight?
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for all that you do, you know, and pushing the topic forward and just talking about it. I mean, we don't have to all be right, but as long as we're talking about it, then it's out there and people are paying attention, and it's a resource, you know. So thank you guys for all that you do.
Well, we appreciate you, Matthew.
Yep,
I want to say before I turn it over to Smitty, folks, I want to encourage you, after you watch All Things Unexplained, get off your screens, get off your cell phones, head out into the woods, go out and look up at the skies, see what you can see what's out there. You might not find Bigfoot and you might not see a UFO, but you might find something even more important, and that's yourself out there. You might find yourself out there, folks. So get out there. Don't count on the government to tell you what to think, tell you what to believe. We are all capable of getting out there and doing our own research and finding out for ourselves, folks. So let's get on that. We can do it. We are powerful. Let's get out there. Smitty.
We thank Matthew again. Thank all our listeners. We're so fortunate to be able to host this podcast, and we miss CJ tonight. And always remember, be happy, be strange, listen to All Things Unexplained, and good night.
I thought you were about to call for offering there.
No. And remember, pass the plate around. No, I'm kidding.
We appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. Make sure to hit like. Check out our YouTube store. Thanks, Smitty. Thanks, Matthew.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. And we're live, and CJ's not here, so it's going to take me a little bit to find the outro. Here it is.
Be happy.
All Things Unexplained
What's your hot take on Travis Taylor?
I've got an exclusive for you guys if you want it about the Alaska.
We do.
Okay.
Dr. Taylor was revealed to be the chief scientist of the UAP task force with the Pentagon.
So some of that, I think, sir, we'll save for closed session.
All Things Unexplained is free to watch on YouTube and listen to wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support our show, you can visit our YouTube store. Additionally, you can find us on Venmo under All Things Unexplained. Be sure to check out our website, allthingsunexplained.com. All proceeds from the sales of Dr. Mounce's books on Amazon and Audible also go straight to our show.